Good morning. And this is day 2 of our devotional series on Habakkuk. And so that means this is chapter 2. Now, Habakkuk has questioned God in chapter 1. And God answered that he was going to use Babylon to judge Judah. And that was not what Habakkuk was hoping to hear. And it only created more questions for Habakkuk. Why use a people that are even more wicked to bring judgment on the people of Judah? It didn't compute for Habakkuk. And so Habakkuk does something wise. Instead of arguing endlessly, he waits to hear from God now in chapter 2. And there's a key phrase at the beginning of this chapter: I will stand on my guard post. Or the translation I have in front of me, I will stand at my watch. Habakkuk chooses to listen. And the key thought as we go through this chapter is that faith is learning to trust God, even when we don't yet understand everything he's doing. Point number 1, faith waits for God's answer. Verse 1, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. So Habakkuk positions himself to hear from God. He doesn't abandon prayer, or he doesn't walk away in frustration. He waits expectantly. And waiting on God is not passive. It is active. It's active trust. Many believers want immediate answers, but often God develops our faith during seasons of waiting. And prayer is not merely speaking to God. It's also listening to God. And listening for God, listening for his voice. Psalm 27, verse 14, wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. That's Psalm 27, verse 14. Second point, God's promises may seem slow, but they are certain. Habakkuk 2, verse 2, it says, Then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets, so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. God assures Habakkuk that his plan will unfold at the proper time. Of course, God's timing is different than ours. Delayed does not mean forgotten. And God's promises never fail. You know, we mentioned yesterday, I think, the example of a waiting room. You know, the waiting room is often part of God's work. Some prayers take longer than we expect, and some answers unfold slowly. But God remains faithful. Second Peter chapter 3. The Lord is not slow about his promise, as some count slowness. Point number 3, let's keep going. The righteous live by faith. Verse 4. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright. But the righteous person will live by his faithfulness, this translation says. The righteous will live. Another translation says, the righteous one will live by his faith. I think of a man years ago who was troubled because he wasn't seeing answers to prayers that he thought he should be seeing, and he went to the Lord and said, increase my faith, increase my faith. Maybe it's my faith. And God, he felt, responded to him in his heart. This is what he felt the Holy Spirit speak to his heart, is that walking in faith means walking in faithfulness. This is a key verse here in chapter 2, verse 4. And this verse is actually later quoted in Romans and Galatians and Hebrews. So it's frequently quoted in the New Testament, making it one of the most influential verses in the Old Testament. Faith is not merely believing facts. Faith is trusting God. Faith continues even when circumstances are unclear. Faith does not mean having all the answers. It means trusting the one who does. You know, we often live by feelings or by circumstances or by appearances. But God calls us to live by faith. The Christian life begins, continues, and ends through faith in God. Point 4, pride ultimately fails. Now we're going to read a good size chunk here. Verse 5. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest, because he is greedy as the grave. And like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the peoples. Will not all of them taunt him with ridicule and scorn, saying, woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion? How long must this go on? Will not your creditors suddenly arise? Will they not wake up and make you tremble? Then you will become their prey, because you have plundered many nations. The peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed human blood. You have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting his nest on high, to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plotted the ruin of many peoples, shaming your own house and forfeiting your life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk, so that he can gaze on their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Drink, and let your nakedness be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. The violence you have done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you. For you have shed human blood, and you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman, or an image that teaches lies? For the one who makes it trusts in his own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, come to life, or a lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? Is it covered with gold and silver? There is no breath in it. That last section there, the kind of the last third of what we just read, really is a great little section kind of talking about the irony of trusting in idols. But anyways, God pronounces here in these verses a series of woes against Babylon. Babylon appeared powerful and wealthy and unstoppable, but God saw her pride and her greed and her violence and injustice. And his judgment may seem delayed, but it's never absent. Evil will never win. The world often celebrates power and status and self-promotion, but God's values are very, very different. And humility remains one of the great marks of genuine spirituality. James 4, verse 6 says, God is opposed to the proud. And it's saying here that Babylon is proud. He's going to use Babylon, but then Babylon is going to have her turn to be judged. And she's not going to escape. God is opposed to the proud, James 4:6 says, but gives grace to the humble. Point 5, God is still on his throne. Verse 20, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. The chapter ends with a breathtaking reminder that God remains sovereign, he remains holy, he remains in control. Babylon looked powerful, but God was still king. And when life feels chaotic, remember who occupies the throne. Circumstances change, governments change, economies change, people change. God does not. The story is told of a lighthouse. During a violent storm, ships tossed on the rough waters. They would look, and of course this is what a lighthouse does and what it's for. They would look toward a lighthouse, standing firmly on the shore. The waves changed, and they were tossed around by the waves. But the lighthouse stood firm. The lighthouse did not change. That's how it is with God's character. He remains steady. His character remains steady when life's circumstances are not. So, Habakkuk 2 teaches us, wait for God's answer. Trust his timing. Live by faith, which means walking in faithfulness. Don't envy the proud. Remember that God is still on his throne. And we can ask ourselves, am I willing to trust God, even while I wait? Am I living by faith? This is a good question for us. Am I living by faith or merely by circumstances? Have I forgotten that God is still in control? When life feels confusing, pray, wait, trust, obey. And remember, the righteous will live by faith. We'll see you tomorrow.